Thanks for the introduction. So good morning again. My name is Tomas. I'm together here with my colleague Dom.
Hello.
We are both software engineers at CERN, and today we're going to tell you about a large open source project we've been developing and maintaining at CERN for the last 20 years. So it's called Indico. It's this general purpose event management tool that is running on Python and Flask. And it essentially lets you organize all sorts of events from meetings, lectures, conferences, and also workshops. And actually, back in 2006 and 2007, Indico was used to run EuroPython as well. And fun fact, the 2006 edition of EuroPython was even hosted at CERN. So in this talk, we're going to tell you a bit about what Indico is and what it can do. We're going to also go into the tech behind Indico and how it has changed over the last 20 years. And then we're going to take a look at some metrics related to our open source project and our community and what we can learn from them. But first, I wanted to tell you a bit about CERN. So you might know CERN from some pop culture. So for example, if you have seen the movie Angels and Demons, starring Tom Hanks, CERN actually features in the opening scene where a bad guy infiltrates CERN and tries to steal some antimatter from us. Which is actually not completely unrealistic, because we do have the antimatter factory on site, which actually makes actual antimatter, and we actually don't work that far from there. There are also some other pieces of media. So for example, there's this Japanese anime Steins Gate that also features CERN, and Flash Forward, which is a sci-fi novel that takes place at CERN. But for real, what is CERN? So CERN is the largest particle physics lab in the world. There are thousands of people working on site, including the two of us, that keep the facilities running. And there are also thousands of scientists who come to CERN every year to use the facilities to run their experiments. So what do we actually do at CERN? So for that, I have a picture that I think summarizes quite well what we do. So the TLDR is basically, at CERN, we take particles, for example, protons, we make them go very, very fast, and then we smash them together and see what happens, right? So technologically, this is a bit more advanced. So to actually do that, we have this thing called the Large Hadron Collider, also known as the LHC. It's the largest particle collider, also particle accelerator in the world, and also the largest machine ever built. And we use this to actually accelerate the particles. To actually study what happens, we also have this thing called the detectors. There are 4 main detectors in the LHC, and you can think of them as basically very large, high-speed cameras that are constantly taking pictures of the collisions, and they allow us to reconstruct what happens. So here, for example, I have a picture of one of the detectors. This is the Atlas detector. And I don't know if you can see, but at the bottom of the picture, there's a human for scale, just so you get an idea of how large these things are. So with these detectors, we've made probably the most famous discovery we made at CERN was the discovery of the Higgs boson back in 2012. The Higgs boson, if you know, or maybe not, it was basically the missing piece in the standard model of particle physics. It was theorized to exist back in the 60s, but we only managed to confirm its existence back in 2012, thanks to the LHC. But enough about physics. This is a tech conference, so you might also know CERN, because that's where, back in 1999, the World Wide Web was invented as well, which is quite cool. And yeah, CERN also supports open source and open science in general. So actually, all the research that we do at CERN is open and available to everybody. And we also open source a lot of projects that we develop internally, so including Indico, that we are talking about now, but also stuff like Root, which is a data analysis framework, Zenodo, which is an open source research repository, and a lot more. CERN also contributes a lot to other open source projects that we use. So for example, OpenStack, KiCad, Matplotlib, and even Python. And speaking of Python, we use Python for pretty much everything at CERN, including web applications like Indico, but also desktop applications, machine learning, data analysis, and just random scripts that hold everything together. And so if you'd like to learn more about some of the cool open source things we do at CERN, here are a couple of links. And with this, I'm going to give word to Dom, who's going to tell you a bit more about Indico.
Thank you, Thomas. So, Thomas has explained nicely about what CERN is and what we do, but you guys are here for Indico. So, but what actually is Indico? Well, to give you a brief summary of what it actually is, it's just your go-to Swiss Army knife for managing your meetings, conferences, more meetings, and a lot more. And, you know, it's generally used at CERN to handle all of our large conferences and events. But, you know, there's also some other stuff you can do with it. For instance, maybe you want to buy a T-shirt for Indico, if you want. But jokes aside, yes, it is a event management system. Its core is developed at CERN. And with it being an open source project, we do take a large number of contributions from other organizations / institutes, such as the United Nations Office in Geneva and the Max Planck Institute for Physics, and a lot more. But also, whilst the core is developed at CERN, the Indico team has changed and shifted over many, many years. And we estimate it to be around over 70 developers have worked on Indico throughout the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years. So, you know, it is one of the more popular event management systems that you've probably never heard about. So, according to our telemetrics, we have around 300 servers worldwide, or instances, that are running Indico, which is serving at around 350,000 plus users. And, you know, this is the culmination of 20 years of development. And you know, beyond its initial growth in the research sector, that is CERN, it has expanded to other, let's say, industries, such as the diplomatic industry, that would be the UN, or the tech industry, such as Chronicle. And of course, there's some links to some of the more popular Indico instances out there. So, under the hood, yes, this is EuroPython, so of course we use Python, but we do use Flask and SQL Alchemy, and as well as we use some non-Python stuff such as Postgres for our database, React, and there's a lot more. You can take a look at our stack online on GitHub if you are curious. But how did we get here? So, as I just say, it's a combination of 20 years worth of development. So this is what our timeline looks like, starting with CDS agenda, and then moving on to our present-day Indico. So, in 1999, CDS Agenda, this was a tool at CERN for managing conferences. It was written mainly in PHP, as many things were back then, and it was using MySQL for the database, so your typical LAMP stack, you could say. And it was developed and maintained, well, at CERN by a small team at CERN for CERN. And this is what it looks like. So just ignore the templating errors that you might see there. We did have to resurrect it from the dead. You can see it is really pretty aged. But yeah, this is what it looks like. So that was 1999. Of course, we then had to change and become more modern. So this led us to, you know, the 2000s, or Indico. So the EU basically had a project proposal for a catch-all event management system. And essentially CERN stepped up, and we then created the Integrated Digital Conference. So it was written in Python. Specifically, we were using the mod Python and mod Whiskey Apache modules, and the ZODB, or Zope Object Database. This also featured a very limited homebrewed templating engine. And after a couple of years of heavy development work, our first event on Indico was released in 2004. This was the CHEP High Energy Physics Conference, hosted in Interlaken, Switzerland. But we call it Event Zero. And of course, as Thomas mentioned, we did host EuroPython. So if you are interested, we've got 2 links there. They're still up. You can access them and see what the fuss was back then. Okay, so moving on, 2010 to 2013. So we dropped the acronym, so we just call it Indico, not Indico. We then started to adopt Flask, and we started to use Flask sessions with Redis just to ease the pressure off ZODB. Moving on, 2014 to 17, ZODB was then replaced with SQL Alchemy and Postgres, and because the ZODB database was quite large and heavy, we had to essentially run ZODB and Postgres in parallel for a while. So on one hand, we were storing users, and on the other hand, we were storing events. Yeah, a bit of a mess. This also led us to replace our homebrewed templating engine with Ginger 2, which, as some of you will know, is part of the Palettes ecosystem, Flask itself, all that stuff. And we essentially used this opportunity to rewrite a really, really large chunk of the Python code base. So when I say rewrite, it was more of a case of refactoring the Python code in the code base, so stuff like embracing PEP8, removing camel case, etc. And we estimated that it was around 200,000 lines of code in the legacy code base that we had to churn through. If you're interested, this is our poster on the evolution of how we managed to pull off this amazing feat. There will be a recording of this talk, so you can probably take a look, but you can also Google for this poster online. So that was a little bit of the history. But we're going to do some highlights, or some really, really abridged highlights. So in 2019, we added React into Indico. This brought us a brand new room booking interface. Then we moved over from Python 2 to Python 3 at around 2020, so around the start of COVID, I believe. And then in 2021, we essentially modernized the OAuth, and we introduced personal access tokens for accessing the Indico API. And we also used this time to clean up some parts of the code base a bit more. In 2022, this was around the time when Switzerland ratified the GDPR into their legislation, so we introduced some better privacy features / controls into Indico, so stuff like exporting your data. And in 2023, after a long time, and this was a really heavily requested feature at CERN, we introduced a document generation with WheezyPrint to generate stuff like the receipts, certificates of attendance, and a lot more. But there is a lot more. So, as well as Indico and all of its many, many features, we did also create a few, let's say, spin-off packages. One of being Flask Multipass. So this was a package written by our lead developer, Adrian Murnick, just over there. Essentially, it lets you configure multiple OAuth methods simultaneously in a really, really nice way. So yes, it ships with Indico, but it's not specific to Indico, so you can go off and use it in your own Flask applications. And yeah, supports basically a good majority of the OAuth protocols, LDAP, SAML, and some of the more, let's say, lesser used ones like Sibboleth. We also created JS Flask URLs. So for some of you web developers in the audience, where you've had to, glue together your URLs with your front end, this package lets you do that quite nicely. So instead of basically just hard coding all of your URLs, you can essentially import them nicely on your front end, and generally it makes things look a lot more nicer and easier to work with. And yes, this was again demonstrated by our lovely developer, Adrian. So this was in the EuroPython 2019 talk titled Use Flask, or How to Use a React Frontend for your Flask app. You can check that out on YouTube. And finally, the Indico CLI. So a big part of running your Indico instance is, yes, you're going to have to go through your terminal to manage everything. To make your life a little bit easier, we have the Indico CLI to help you manage your users, events, what have you. But if you are actively developing Indico, whether that would be writing new code or writing a plugin for Indico, you can use the CLI to help you debug some stuff. For instance, here, I'm running the Indico shell just to print out some data from the database, well, some events from a category. Okay, so that's everything. I will now hand back the reins to Tomas. Thank you very much.
Hi. We're not done yet, okay. As Dom mentioned, so Indico is an open source project. We develop it mainly at CERN, but it's also on GitHub. We accept contributions from other people. So we are curious to find out how we are doing as a project. So in terms of code, contributors, also sustainability. So it turns out there's actually this cool Linux Foundation project called Chaos, which gives you all sorts of different metrics you can actually run on your open source projects to figure out how you are doing, again, in terms of code, contributors, funding, sustainability, all sorts of things. And so we wanted to show some of these metrics here for Indico. So we are mostly interested, again, in code and how it has evolved over the years. Also, technical debt and legacy code for a project as old as Indico is always relevant. How are the contributors evolving for Indico? What is the buzz factor for Indico? And what is the work-life balance for us in the team? And is there a risk of burnout? So let's take a look. So the first graph I see, and I hope it's visible, this basically shows the evolution of the size of our code base from 2009 to 2025. And I say 2009 because 2009 was the year we started using Git, so we basically have information from 2009, so the last 15 or 16 years. And you can also see the composition of the most used technologies and languages we use in Indico. So we are actually using Python, but also React, JavaScript, CSS, Jinja, and some other things as well. And the cool thing about this graph is actually if you look at the size of the code base we have now, and in 2009, it's pretty much the same amount, which I think is quite cool because over the last 15 years, we've shipped probably hundreds of features in Indico, but the size of the code has remained more or less stable, which means we are much more efficient in what we are able to achieve per line of code, which I think is quite cool. Then moving on to technical debt and legacy code. So yes, Indico is more than 20 years old, so there is bound to be some legacy code, but we would like to actually be able to measure how much of it we have, and we would like to be able to answer some of these questions. So how much legacy code do we have? How often does the code that we have actually change? And are there some modules in Indico that nobody actually wants to touch because nobody remembers, how it works, and we are afraid of breaking it? And of course, you don't want to have too much legacy code because then it's going to be very difficult to explain to all the new hires how the whole thing actually works. So it turns out you can actually kind of measure this just from your Git repository. So this graph is basically just a histogram which shows the age of all the lines of code we have in Indico. So in other words, what this is saying basically, if I commit something today, how long is the code going to survive in the repository before it's either modified or deleted? And if you look at the average, not sure if it's visible, but it says the average is about 6 years. So this means, again, if I commit something today, probably in 6 years it's going to be either gone or just going to be refactored in some way. And I would say 6 years is actually not a bad number to have, because first it means we aren't actually rewriting stuff all the time. So we do have some stable and battle-tested code in Indico, which is really good. But at the same time, 6 years is not too old. Well, maybe for some web technologies and JavaScript it is too old, but it's not too old in absolute terms. So we don't have too much legacy code. It's still manageable. Even though, I don't know if you can see, but here, there's some small piece that says 16 years old. So this hasn't been touched in a very long time. And actually, this is the part we are currently rewriting and trying to get rid of. So this will hopefully be gone very, very soon. All right. So moving on to contributors. So as we mentioned, most of the development happens at CERN. We have a team at CERN that does most of the development for Indico. But we are on GitHub. We accept contributions, and we actually do get a lot of features and contributions from other organizations using Indico. For example, United Nations is contributing quite a lot, especially recently. And we also get a lot of contributions from individuals as well. So we wanted to have a look at how we are doing in that regard. So I have some graphs for that here. So the top graph basically shows the cumulative number of contributors we've had since 2009 to present day. So to date, we've had almost 200 contributors contributing code to Indico, which I think is quite cool, especially given the size and complexity of Indico. It still shows that people are able to get familiar with it and contribute in a meaningful way, which is really awesome. And at the bottom, we have kind of a breakdown per year. So there's how many contributors we get, how many people contribute to Indico per year. And again, the team at CERN is 5 or 6 people, but we still average for the last couple of years 40 or 50 people per year, which is quite cool. And we get a lot of new contributors, which are here shown in orange. That's the people that contribute for the first time during the year. So still a lot of new people contributing as well, which is really awesome. But writing code is not the only way you can contribute to open source projects. There are a lot of other things you can contribute. You can write documentation, tutorials, you can do design, you can be in the community, building up a community around the project, or you can just be spreading the word. But there is one more thing I think we've been doing quite well in Indico, which is translations. So Indico is actually available in more than 15 official translations, and there are a couple more that are a work in progress at this point. And this is, well, besides French, this is all done by volunteer translators who just, do this in their spare time for Indico. And this is actually a big effort because Indico is a very large application, and there are more than 6,000 phrases and UI elements that need to be translated for Indico. So this is actually a large effort. And yeah, it's just really cool to see so many people, doing this sort of thing, which is normally not the main thing that people talk about. Usually it's all about code, but this is another really awesome way people can contribute as well. Right, moving on to something less fun. So the bus factor, if you are not familiar with that, it's basically, it's kind of a number that tells you how many people need to get run over by a bus or win a lottery before you don't know where the passwords are, and before you cannot access the production servers, and before nobody knows how the app actually works. So it's a single point of failure, which we as engineers don't like. We like redundancy. And it's also kind of a proxy for how well the knowledge is distributed within your team. If your bus factor is low, it means there's just a few people who know everything and a lot more people who are kind of struggling to get the big picture. So again, this is something you can kind of measure just from your Git repository. So the way I define the bus factor here is basically the number of people who make up more than 50% of all the commits. And this is, again, like breakdown by years. And so you can see that for us, we started at reasonably healthy number 3, then it went down to 2, then it went down to 1. And then the last 2 years, we've been back at 2, but yeah, I don't think that 2 is also that great of a number. And I don't have anything smart to say here. It's just to show that, well, we're also struggling with these things, and it's not easy to, to do this. And the last thing I have is related to maintaining a healthy work-life balance. And this is especially important for open source projects where there can be a lot of pressure to respond to issues and review pull requests and do it quickly, especially if the project is relatively big. And also something that I think we also struggle a bit with in Indico is just the difficulty of saying no to feature requests from people, especially when people not only request features, but they also submit pull requests with some reasonable implementation, because then saying no means you're also saying no, you're kind of throwing away all the time they spent on implementing the features. And this is something I think we had to learn the hard way in Indico. There's probably some features that we should have said no to in the beginning, and now we're kind of paying for that. But that's something you have to learn. And just for that, I have one last graph to show. So this is what this graph shows is essentially the number of commits, again broken down by year, the number of commits that were made outside of the regular or the official working hours at CERN. So this basically measures how much overtime our team worked over the years. And you can kind of see that 2015 and 2016 is looking quite weird. Yeah, there was a lot of overtime during those years because there was this large refactor going on, also this large database migration, as Dom mentioned, from ZeroDB to Postgres. But I wanted to show this graph, not so much for this, but just to show that since then, the trend has been going down quite rapidly, and 2025 is looking much more healthy, in my opinion, at least so far, if nothing goes wrong. So yeah, that's pretty much all we have. So just to recap, Indico has been through a lot of changes over the last 20 years. We've changed technologies, frameworks, databases, even programming languages. And so who knows where we're gonna be in 5, 10, 15 years. But for sure, Indico is still gonna be around and kicking. And yeah, if you'd like to get involved, we are on GitHub. We have hundreds of open issues, so if you'd like to help out, we'll be more than happy. And also, if you'd like to get involved with translations for Indico, we have a project on Transifex, which you can join, and we'll be more than happy to show you around. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we are open up for the questions. So if you guys have any questions, please just raise your hand and I will come there. And there is a mic. Okay. So anyone nearby mic, you can just use that mic.
Thanks for your talk and thanks for Indico. We are using it at work. I'm one of employees of Canonical, so thank you very much for that. At the very last slide, very quickly, you blinked up. I was interested in the translation tool you're using. Could you tell us a little bit more about why you choose that and how it's integrated?
You mean Transifex?
Yes.
Yeah.
I never heard of that. Maybe can quickly tell us why you choose that one and not some others like WebBlade or any of the other available tools.
I think that's more of a historical reason. We've been using Transifex for many, many years. At this point, I think before WebBlade was as good as it is now. We've considered, I think, migrating to WebBlade at some point, but at this point, we have a lot of translators who are used to Transifex, so I think migrating would probably hurt more people than it would help. So, and we are quite happy with the free version of Transifex, to be honest.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask how you made those pretty graphs with the number of commits and how the lifetime of particular code. What did you use? Is the data from the GitHub API or something?
No, it's just matplotlib with this theme called Aquarel, which you can just pip install. You can do pip install Aquarel, and you will get there are a lot of like pre-built themes that you can use to make this. So yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have any more questions?
Hello, thank you for your presentation. Maintaining the project for so long can have a lot of difficulties. I maintain myself for 10 years. And I often have, you always think that you refactor, you make your code base better and better, new technologies, new frameworks. My question would be, would you ever regret it about some decision that you moved to some new framework or technology, and after like 2 or 3 years you realized maybe we shouldn't have made it?
It's just a personal opinion, but React and the JavaScript ecosystem. But to be serious, I mean, yes, there are always going to be regrets, right? I mean, whenever you change tech, I mean, you see something new, of course, many people will jump on the bandwagon, and then over time it matures and something else is brand new. I mean, it's difficult to sort of answer that because, I mean, we try to follow our best standards, but these standards change over time, and, you know, it's just plain old difficult. I'm not sure if it answers your question, but this is our own take on it.
Oh, sure. For me, it's also a bit more interesting if you ever had like a serious discussion or retro to evaluate something like that, or it's more like, okay, we have community, we have developers, so probably we will need to continue to support that.
I think it's more or less about, you know, we see something that really, really fits our needs, and, you know, if it works out well for, let's say, the general wider audience. Just to give a very quick example of what we did in the last the last 2 years, we essentially got rid of the Indico check-in application. So in Indico, you can scan your badges, to let attendees check into your event. So what we did is that the original iOS and Android application, they were just written in Codova, which is some weird Apache framework. It basically converts your HTML, CSS, and JS to your APK or whatever format Apple uses. But yes, it was outdated, so we then decided to move to a PWA in 2023 because it was, relatively new and, it fits our needs. But, this was a, sort of impulse decision because we saw that it was a really, really good choice for us at the time. But, I mean, who knows? I mean, there could be some major changes to PWAs. I'm sure you've heard about, Apple not being too happy with PWAs. So for us, it was something which maybe it's not the wisest choice we made, but for now, it's working well for us. Again, I'm not sure if my disjointed explanation answers your question,
no,
but
fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I can also add a small comment on that topic. Just like the guy said, I'm the lead developer and project manager of Indico since, around 10 years now. So, I mean, I think your question was mainly about something we added later and then regretted. But I think a perfect example of something that was added actually very early is use of ZODB. Because initially when the project started, I mean, it was also before my time, but basically the idea was to have something that's easy to prototype. And I think now people call ZODB sometimes a glorified pickle store, because you literally just take Python objects, they get pickled, and you get them back from the database. Which, I mean, for a small application is nice, but you have something as big as Indico where things change over time, then suddenly you realize you have a database where, let's say you have 2 events in the database and they're different objects because they were saved maybe with a few years in between. So suddenly you need to catch attribute errors when simply trying to access an object an attribute that should always exist. So I think that's the thing that probably, I guess we regretted the most, but at the same time it also meant that we were basically able to spend 3 years with, I think, 3.5 FTEs on those 89 and 98% rewrite and cleaning up all of the, let's say, very legacy Python code. So in the end, it's a bit of a regret, but I think the outcome was still positive. And I don't think we would have gotten the resources to do that had we not had the opportunity to change the database because we were basically no longer doing it. Cool. And by the way, at the end of the talk, we also have a bunch of CERN and Indico stickers.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It's been super cool to hear about a so long-lived and so healthy open source project. I have a question about how you manage your community, basically. Like you said, you had telemetry, and there are over 350 instances out there. Do you actively look at that? Like, do you track them, and also do you have some place where users, developers can, like a mailing list, a channel, something?
Yeah, so we have the Indico Discuss forum. You can access it at talk.getindico.io. Essentially, it's a general purpose forum for all things Indico, whether that's if you are a admin of a Indico instance, you want to learn about developing your Indico plugin, or maybe you are a translator who wants to get involved into translating Indico into a specific language. So yes, there is a community for that. We also have let me fast forward a few slides, a matrix channel. So you can also discuss your thoughts about Indico and ask us, the core devs, your questions there. But also regarding the telemetrics, so when you deploy an Indico instance, you, as an administrator, have the option to report back some telemetrics. So, and it's just for us to see, that yes, you are alive, you exist, and we can probably infer some stats from it for us to use, just to get an idea of how many instances are there in the world or in the wild, who's using it, and maybe what version of Indico they're running. And the version part is a bit more critical because when we have security updates, maybe there might be some issues in the older versions of Indico. So it's really, really good for us to communicate that to the affected instances as quickly as we can.
All right, I have a second somewhat follow-up question. You said you had sometimes a hard time rejecting pull requests and so on. But regarding both pull requests and feature requests that are external to CERN, how do you prioritize them? Like, do you check first if that fits within what CERN needs? And then how do you communicate that both to the developers and the users? Like, do you have a change log? Do you try to avoid breaking changes? How does that work?
Yeah, so originally when Indico was just for CERN, we would just do whatever made sense for CERN. But then when the community started forming also outside of CERN, we realized, we also need to make, so the way we do it now, essentially, the core of Indico is basically for everybody. There is no CERN specific stuff in it. And then at CERN, we have some CERN specific plugins to augment the functionality for the things that we only use at CERN. For example, visitor badges to get access to CERN, stuff like that. All the other things that go into the core of Indico are things that we think make sense for everybody, also for users outside of Indico, outside of CERN, sorry.
Any more questions? Okay.
Sorry, I have a question. If it comes to operations, we kind of touched the operations side. I don't know if you can, or there's a person who can respond, but I will ask, so how hard is to get, it's Python-based project, so how hard to get it into compliance with all the security?
Okay, looks like I have to reply to that. So basically, we follow, I would say, standard recommendations for installing Python applications, aka pinning all our dependencies. So also some consideration right now about also publishing an SBOM. Even so, I mean, personally, I think it's a bit more this kind of thing for, let's say, less technical security folks to tick certain checkboxes. But if it makes people happy, it makes, of course, sense to have it, and it's quite easy to generate nowadays.
Okay, I see the SBOM exporter as a pull request on a GitHub. So it's not implemented yet. You plan to do it?
So the discussion came up a few weeks ago, and yeah, we are still looking into it. What's the best way to generate it? Because, for example, we also have both Python and JavaScript, but JavaScript is purely client-side. Mm-hmm. And as everybody who uses Dependabot probably knows, you get lots of very useless PRs about regular expression denial of service in some JavaScript package, which is completely irrelevant because if you can make your own browser window use a bit too much CPU, it doesn't really matter. So of course the Python one is an interesting one, but from what I've seen, all the SBOM tools basically take everything. So it's a bit not completely clear what's the best way of doing it for something like this.
Okay, thank you.
I was very interested in the graph where you showed about work-life balance and whether you work after hours. But as Indico is an open source project and open source has no barriers, how did you basically restrict it to known employees of CERN, or did you what about the external contributors? You probably don't know where they are living.
Yeah, I think I did some filtering to basically just restrict it to the people that work at CERN at the time. And we do get outside contributors, but still the majority of commits actually originate from the team at CERN. So even if there was something in it, it's not gonna bias the results too much.
Thank you.
I mean, also I think a good point on that one is which I mean also affects the graph a bit, that basically at some point a few years ago we switched to most of our PRs to use GitHub's squash and merge feature, which of course means it creates one commit and at the time you click the button. which I mean can also be like later in the evening. I mean, I'm the kind of person who likes to sometimes merge the PR like later, like after having gone home. And so it's 2 years that look kind of bad. So also to add some more context. So we always valued availability very highly. Nowadays it's basically 0 downtime for updates. But back then, like they said, we had 2 databases in parallel because we're gradually moving things from ZeroDB to Postgres. And this actually involved importing a huge amount of data. So sometimes that was import script that was running maybe 2 or 3 hours, during which we had to take the service down. So we usually started those things at 7 or 8 p.m. And of course, then if we encountered any issues after it finished, we basically fixed them immediately before going home. But just since some people might think, okay, overtime is bad, nobody actually told us you have to do overtime for it, but it was more like our own, let's say, standards that we were like, we don't want to propagate then errors we spotted like maybe at midnight down to the next day when then everybody comes back to CERN and starts using Indico again. So, and I think that's also in terms of work-life balance a very important thing. Because if you decide on your own to do, let's say, a migration at night or do an upgrade on a Sunday night, then it's your own decision and you're probably happy to do it. While if somebody from above came and told you, hey, now you have to use that Saturday to do an upgrade, I think then people are much less inclined to enjoy doing it. And again, we have stickers.
So any more questions? Okay, so I think we are done. So let's thank our speaker, Dominic and Thomas. And